Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Blundell, and I'm part of the Breaking the Boundaries Collective, which is a group of service users, professionals, academics, and services who are interested in exploring what it means to move beyond those traditional notions of boundaries and move towards a more relationship-based practice. So this is our first interview or event that we're kind of doing today. So I'm delighted to be joined by Rita Edah, who is a counsellor, psychotherapist, coach, and counselling supervisor in private practice. She is also an associate clinical tutor at the University of East London and author of Beauty Story, Some Cuts Are Deeper Than the Eye Can See. If you want to find out more information about her, you can go to ritaedah.com. But Rita, welcome to our first event.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We will get into in a moment why I've invited you onto this event and the particular area of interest. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit first about your work as a therapist before you entered into the project we're going to talk about?
Not a lot really to say about my work as a therapist before that project, because I got involved with that project at the beginning almost of my career. I've come into this work at a later point in life, so I've done a lot of other things and so many other different things. And then I got to a point in my life where I was like, actually, what do I want to do when I grow up? And that question brought me into the field of counseling and psychotherapy and coaching. So when I got involved in the project we're going to talk about, I was in the final year of my training.
That's really.
I'd had some, I don't remember how many hours of placement practice. So my practice then was on placement. And then this came up and I got involved in it. So it was at the beginning of my counseling and psychotherapy.
Brilliant. I mean, that's really interesting in itself to kind of qualify and then kind of enter into this project, which we'll talk about now. So Rita's written a paper about this project, which is Hestia's overnight counselling service. Can you tell people a little bit about how it came about then, and how did it work? What was it for?
So Hestia's overnight counseling service was set up in response to the needs of the survivors of the Grenfell fire tragedy in 2017. So the fire happened in the middle of the night around 1 a.m. or thereabouts. And lots of people were homeless. The number of those who died was put at 72. Thereabouts. There were lots of people were homeless. There were lots of difficulties. And so part of the council's response was in housing the displaced residents in hotels and temporary accommodation across West London, and then wanting to support with the mental and emotional difficulties that had arisen. However, there was difficulties in engagement in the traditional NHS counseling psychotherapy, where they did provide the service, but residents weren't engaging. And so as time went on, it felt like a desperation on the part of the council, because there were lots of eyes on the council. What are you doing for your people? There was lots of stuff in the news about the issues going on. And so there was a desperation to say, what can we do? How can we help? So the council approached Hestia, which was a local charity in the area that had a good relationship with the community already, and said, what can you do? So Hestia's idea was, okay, if the people won't come to counseling where we are, in terms of, okay, this is our office, this is our clinical practice, you come, we'll make an appointment and all that. Why don't we go to them? So that's how the service got born, that the overnight counseling service was set up, where the times, I think a little bit of research, a bit of feedback was got from the service users as well. And it turned out that the times they struggled the most was at night, understandably. So the service was set up from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. So we started at 8 p.m. in the evening and stayed overnight till about 3 a.m. And the idea was to go to the hotel. So counselors were paired. It was usually a group of 2 to each hotel. And it was 7 days a week. So because you couldn't work 7 days a week, right? So it was done in such a way that it was flexible. You didn't go to the same hotel all the time. There was a rota system. What was regular was it was usually a group of 2 counselors. You went to the hotel from 8 in the evening to 3 in the morning. Now, unlike traditional counseling services where you have an assessment, you book an appointment, you see your counselor and that. This was a case of where the counselors just rocked up, set up shop wherever you found some space, and hoped that service users, clients will come to you. Before then, they'd been written, information had been given to them that this service is coming, people are going to come to the hotels at this time, and this is how you will recognize them. They would have the scarf. Right, so if we forgot anything, we never forgot our scarves because this is how we got known that we are here for this service. We had the scarf, sometimes we might wrap it around our heads, or we might drape it like that, or we might put it on a thing, on the chair, it's too hot, yeah? So this was the scarf. And this is how service users knew, oh, those guys are from Hestia. So in a way, the relationship was with the community of residents and the community of counselors. It wasn't a one-to-one practice in the way we usually know it.
Thank you for explaining that. I think it sounds like such an interesting project, and I think really picking up on what you were talking about there, that actually clients or service users weren't going to the counselling service that was kind of being offered, and so there was like this idea to kind of reimagine it or kind of create something that could be taken to people rather than expecting them to make the trip and the journey over to see the therapists themselves. And it sounds like that the traditional notion of boundaries that we imagine in a lot of counselling and psychotherapy relationships was kind of flipped on its head. Even just the working hours from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m., it's like that's usually when people therapists sign off in the evening, isn't it? About 8 o'clock rather than when they start work. So it really flipped the notion of what boundaries we're supposed to be adhering to completely on its head, which is one of the reasons why we were interested in talking about this project.
It did. And it worked because this was what the people needed, right? So we could say we're here 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or whatever. And the residents, the clients, service users, we use the words interchangeably. They're like, yeah, we're doing whatever we're doing during the day, whatever other appointments we have to do. But then we come back to our hotels at night and we discover, oh, we actually are not at home. We actually don't have kitchens. We actually, and then it all comes home to bear. This is when we need the support. Why do I need to stay up all through the night to come knock on your door in the morning? I'm not saying they said these words, right? But from what transpired where the traditional services weren't being engaged with, showing up to them at the point of their need where they engaged.
And wrapping that service around what specifically people need at that time rather than expecting people to adapt to the service. Yeah. And it's really powerful. You also, so as part of that project, you then decided to complete a piece of research to kind of explore and understand kind of some of the stuff that was happening. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was that you looked at?
So, I mean, even though I came into the practice of counseling and psychotherapy at a later phase in life, I was aware of counseling. I partaked of counseling and enjoyed, I'd grown through counseling. I was aware, just like most counselors, I'm sure, it's almost like the word counseling and boundaries always go together. There's certain expectations that, oh, you can't do that, or you can't show up early, or whatever. So seeing the way boundaries in the traditional sense of the word were non-existent in that service, it piqued my interest to say, actually, how was this? Can we look at this? This was after the service had been decommissioned and there was some distance. So looking back to say what actually happened and how did it work? I was curious about that. And so I did a piece of work around that.
So you decided to do some research around that, and there was some really interesting themes that came out of that, which you can read in Rita's paper, which we'll put a link in the show notes to this. But can you tell us a little bit about some of those themes then?
Going from memory, so if you remind me if I miss out on anyone. The first one that comes to mind is that it worked. And so I spoke with how many clients? How many colleagues? I think about 9. And it was almost a surprise that, oh my goodness, it worked. It actually worked. So the idea in traditional counseling and psychotherapy is that we need boundaries to make this work, and we need these boundaries, we need this set time and this set place and all of that. This was the very opposite of that. And it worked. Right. So out of that surprise and delight and gratification that it worked, were other sub-themes that, yes, it worked, but it brought about questions like boundaries. What is this thing about? What is this thing about boundaries? Now, in this service, I guess the only boundaries we had was the starting times and the ending times. And ideally, show up with your scarf so they know who you are, right? Everything else was, you didn't know who was coming day to day. So I'm here with my scarf, and today I might see Miss A, and tomorrow I might see Mr. B, and sometimes it's the whole family, right? So and yet the feedback, because service providers contacted the charity directly, and sometimes they said to us as well, they liked that we were there, they felt safer. Some said they didn't engage with the service directly, in that they didn't come to us, but that knowing we were there meant they were able to sleep better at night. And when we got that, so that was emails to the agency. And when in one of the supervision meetings that was expressed to us, it was very comforting because it was chaotic compared to anything you would have experienced in counseling and psychotherapy. But to hear that people are saying, yes, we might not have come to you to tell us and explain all of that, but just knowing you're in the lobby means I can go to bed and sleep.
But it's interesting that you say chaotic, because I imagine it might have felt like that compared to the traditional counselling relationship, which is at a prearranged time, a set time we see each other at the same time every week, that type of thing, compared to this kind of fluid, open drop-in, I suppose, of when anyone could kind of come whenever they like. And even the sense that just setting it up and just having it meant that people felt safer and more secure because they knew that they had somewhere to turn to if they needed to. Meant that they didn't need to go and see you, but they knew that it was there. Yeah, that's lovely. One of the other themes that came out of it was that Grenfell happened because people weren't heard. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that theme.
Yes, and so with the way the work went, I'll get to that in a minute. I'll get to your question directly in a minute, but it brings something in that, in the traditional psychotherapy counseling thing, we have an hour to hour, we have our client, we have the session. We might use a bit of our experience, we might use a bit of ourselves in the interaction. That in the work with the Grenfell community, it felt like we were integrated into the community. It felt that we were integrated into their lives. A lot of us felt their material resonated, and so understanding how ignored they felt, how the cries around the problems in the housing, the reason the fire took off and the reason it got so bad so quickly, if those things had been taken care of, that tragedy could have been prevented. So there was a lot of anger around that. We were not heard, we were not listened to. It's why all of this had happened. And so in the parallel, come to the support they needed, it was almost like, well, we don't want to go there. They didn't say that, we don't want to go there, they just didn't go. So what Hestia did was, okay, let's listen to what the people need. Why don't we ask them what they need? Why don't we show up in the way they need? So what Hestia did was try to listen and hear and offer a service that the community actually wanted and needed.
Which was different from how people had experienced things beforehand.
Which was very different from how they'd experienced before.
Yeah. It sounds like that it was a very meaningful experience for a lot of people. And I know one of the other themes that came out was, I owe the way I practice now to what I experienced, what I experienced. Can you tell us a little bit about that from the therapist's point of view?
Yes. So all of the therapists I spoke with afterwards, they were like, that was different. It was so different from what I've experienced. It was so different from how I used to practice. And so based on how that was, the flexibility around boundaries, the being willing to try something different, the being called upon to recognize at an individual level, how far can I go, meant people took this into their work, into their private practice, into their work as employees even. People brought up new initiatives that created new ways of working in the field. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like it really challenged those therapists' notions of boundaries and how they understood them, and then that had like a knock-on effect in terms of influencing their like future practice. So it sounds wonderful. It sounds really, really interesting. I'm wondering though, what were the difficulties that you had? I'm sure there must have been some challenges there along the way as well.
It was challenging. It was challenging. There were several challenges. I think one of the most difficult challenges was computing the training and what were the expectations of the training for lots of therapists. Everyone I spoke to said this, and what was actually happening. So there were the ideas of how I'm here, you're there, we meet for a set time, and then you retreat. Okay. There is the idea of, oh no, well, some modalities are more flexible in terms of around receiving gifts than others. But there's the general notion that you don't go accepting gifts from clients, and if the client insists, you have to take it to your agency, you all share and that. No, clients were offering you food, right? We were in their space. There are cases where a counselor might want to go early and say, okay, let me have dinner before my shift. And the next thing you know, your dinner has been paid for. And you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be working, not being fed. What's going on here? So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of, am I doing the right thing? But then I'm wanting to relate with the client where they are. And if it makes them feel positive, if it's a positive communication to them that I accept their gift, why not?
And it sounds like, it makes me think about the therapeutic relationship, and actually that was maybe part of that in these circumstances, that there was like this reciprocal relationship that was happening in this space. Yeah.
There was also the challenge of there's also a different kind of challenge in that, because of the setting, because it was an open setting in hotel lobbies and that. Sometimes counselors were approached by random people. Yeah. And when they discovered, okay, you're here for Grenfell, oh, and almost sometimes if we weren't busy with Grenfell residents for a season, we might have a random guest or a hotel staff that was having counseling sessions. Because, we're counselors, right? And although people might not want to sign up for counseling, we discovered that actually people like being listened to. It's like a fundamental human need to be heard.
Again, that's another notion of, okay, the boundaries of what this service was set up for, but actually it was a drop-in service, and you had different people drop in, to kind of access it and want to kind of talk about their lives in some way, which I think is really interesting. I'm going to ask this obvious question because I think people might be interested, but I wondered whether one of the challenges might be around confidentiality, given the space that you were in and trying to have those conversations.
Yeah, Confidentiality, maybe privacy even more than confidentiality, because everyone knew, or at least the hotel, the staff, the management, they knew we were there for the Grenfell clients. And the Grenfell clients knew that everyone knows you. So there was something around that. With confidentiality, yes, there was that as well. So we could be overheard. Some hotels had boardrooms we could use, but not everyone was able to offer that. So there was that, but you know what, as time went on, it became less of an issue. We became, when I say we, I'm talking about we as counselors and we as service users became less concerned about being overheard and more concerned about we're here. How can we help? How can we work together? And in a way, as I thought about it afterwards, and as I think about it now, this thing about privacy and confidentiality in counseling, sometimes it's almost like a stigma. I mustn't let my neighbor know I'm going counseling. Why not? It's okay for me to say to my neighbor, oh, I'm going to my GP, I'm going to see the doctor, but I'm going to see my therapist. Oh no, I'm going for a meeting. Why?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like, I think what you might be saying is like the idea of confidentiality almost makes us like fearful of just explaining what it is that we're doing or where we're going or yeah.
And that is okay. It's actually okay to talk about emotional and mental stuff.
And particularly after what people have been through, it's okay to go and access some support and help after experiencing something like that.
And even in day-to-day life, even extrapolating that to day-to-day life, we should be okay saying, I'm going for therapy. I'm going to see my counselor. And as counselors, I think we need to be more open to the idea that counseling is a thing. It's not this thing that we need to hide. There's a fine line between confidentiality and secrecy. And sometimes you feel like there's a secret little thing going on here. No. Why can't we be open about it?
And I suppose as well, I was thinking about this, the way the service is set up, as long as people are making an informed choice about what they're sharing and what context they're in and all of those kind of things, then, got the confidentiality is there to protect people, but people can make decisions around who they see and what they talk about in different spaces.
It's the client's choice, what they want to share.
Can you tell, I think you've spoken about a few different benefits, but is there any other benefits that you found of working outside the usual boundaries of the therapy relationship or the therapy space even?
It benefits the clients a lot because it meets them where they are. It privileges the human connection. So we're not tied to these rules and these policies and these procedures that unnecessary. So the benefits of working in a flexible way is we interact with the client human to human, right? And it kind of tries to manage the power dynamic. So if I'm setting all the rules, what about you as a client? If I'm saying you have to abide by my rules, so we agree to an appointment at 10, and you come at 5 minutes to 10, I'm like, no, can't let you in, you're too early. Well, what is that? Now, if I'm not able to let you in because I'm in with another client, or I need to make myself a cup of tea or something, that's understandable. But if I'm saying, no, you're too early, you have to stay out there until I let you in, that's a power play right there. What if I was to let the client in, which I do, by the way? Because, we're human.
Yeah. And it sounds like to me that what you're talking about, particularly in this service, was almost like a co-creation of boundaries.
Exactly.
That it was like mutual. It was like, okay, yeah, me as the therapist is informing some of this, but actually you as the client is also informing some of this as well. Yeah.
And also, so the benefit for the client, there's also the benefit for the practitioner because it enforces reflection, journaling. Why did I say journaling? So when you're having all the reflection and you're having all the internal conflict and you don't know what to do about it, like, I need to journal till I see my therapist or whatever. But it did stimulate growth.
Well, I love that because I think about the idea of boundaries and like when you talk about when they can be so rigid, or these are just the boundaries and this is what happens. I think as therapists, and not just therapists, as other professionals as well, we might just follow them because that's just what we've always done, or a service has followed them for decades. Therefore, that's just what we do. But actually, once we remove the traditional notion of what boundaries is or professional boundaries, all of a sudden we're quite exposed.
Exactly.
And then it's, well, okay, how do we manage this now? We're going to have to reflect on what is going on constantly to make sure that we're safe, the client is safe, everyone is feeling comfortable with what's going on. So it creates this freedom, but also creates this level of, oh, actually, we really need to think about what's going on here. Yeah,
Exactly that. Yeah.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Rita, it's been absolutely fascinating. I suppose, is there anything we haven't covered or talked about today that you wanted to share?
Um, not really. I guess the only thing that comes to mind, and I don't know, this is just a wish. I don't know if it will ever happen, but I wish there was something like a community of counselors and a community of this kind of community to community kind of practice. There's a one-to-one which has been established. Yes, there's a one to a group where you have a counselor or two facilitating group therapy. But what we had in Grenfell was a community of counselors working with a community of people. And it just felt different. It felt growth inducing in a different kind of way. And if I had a wish, it would be for that to happen without there having been some tragic event first. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that stood out to me was that I feel like this was like a mobilized response to what happened at Grenfell. And so you were kind of creating it as you were going along, and responding and reacting to that and trying to put in some kind of support. I suppose what you're asking for there is actually a group or a collective of counselors or psychotherapists who are able to either be in communities already or be a group who can respond to different events that are happening within the UK or the world potentially.
Mm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's lovely. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our time. If you're interested in reading a little bit more about Hestia's overnight hotel counselling service, you can read Rita's paper, which we'll put the link in the show notes. And if you want to find out about the work of the Breaking the Boundaries Collective, you can go to www.breakingtheboundaries.co.uk. Rita, thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.